Okie dokie. There's a new acronym. So, first off, I want to say that my 4-letter acronym thesis has taken the field here. So, we're all going to do 4-letter acronyms. All right, so basically, Tech Lab is now saying, wait, it's not just our ARTF, we got to do more, which I think is true. So let's look at what they're doing here. Let's zoom way in. So first thing that's interesting about this is this idea of trust and transparency being built on an agent registry. And I think this is actually a fundamentally different mindset than kind of the way that I look at the world, which is to me that trust is built on humans, actually, and on businesses and companies and real world entities. And that the foundation can't just be registry. It actually has to be things like brand standards and governance. And if you look at the agenticadvertising.org community, the largest working group is governance. And one thing you'll note is nothing about this framework talks about governance, which I think is really fascinating. Because when I talk to brands and when I talk to publishers, almost everyone wants to be certain that governance has been thought through fully. Another thing you don't see here, unless I'm missing it, is privacy. And privacy has plagued this industry for a long time. And if you're not addressing some of these foundational questions, having an agent registry isn't enough. And you really need to ask yourself, for whom is this framework? I'll compare this just as an example to AAO, where if you look at this registry, first of all, we do have an agent registry, but it's actually members, brands, and publishers. And if you go in the brand registry, one really cool thing is that this is about brands being able to identify themselves. And so if you look at, an Anomaly or an Annie's or an Aquafina, this is a mix of companies, because look, AT&T is a brand, but it's also at times a media company, at times an ad tech company, as I know firsthand. And so we really need to know who are the companies and entities who are acting. And then we also need to understand, publishers. And here you have, this is not obviously every single publisher, but it's interesting because, like AI Games.ai, I don't know what this is, has 367 properties. They're probably a mobile game company, right? Which is helpful because now I can actually go see this. And this is, there's a bunch of MCP stuff behind this that you can use. And I think that's just a really foundational question of, who's involved, and then how would you participate? Of course, there's things like this where you could actually begin to build your, brand.json out. I'll put Nike in as an example of this. And they don't have one live on their site at brand.json, but, I could go build this out and, eventually I could actually see how AI agents would see my brand.json if I had it, which I don't. So I only mention this because I think it's really important to take away the hype of things and really get to what they're doing, okay? Then we have a bunch of things. We have agentic audiences, which is the contributed protocol from LiveRamp, which I don't think has been implemented by anyone. AdCom, which is RTB 3.0, which also wasn't adopted by anyone. OpenDirect, which was designed by the YieldX team around when they were acquired by AppNexus a decade ago. It's been adopted in out-of-home a little bit. Deals API, I don't think that's been adopted by anyone. I don't think it's finished. OpenRTB has broad standard adoption, so this one's good. Not sure what this one is. And then CloudX is a brand new startup who, huge respect for Jen Payne, but this is a new protocol that I don't think anyone's really put a lot of work into. And then you have this sort of SDKs on both sides, which is great, but I think the fundamental question is, what if you sort of just step back on what problem are we solving for here? I don't actually know what problem this solves for. This is a lot of stuff. But to me, the question is, how does a buyer negotiate with a seller? How does a buyer discover what a seller can do? And, even in here, I guess functionally research agents or audience project, maybe this is the level 3 stuff, but look at channel specialists, CTV, mobile, DSP, that's not a channel. Maybe there's supposed to be more stuff in here display, video, CTV, mobile, native. Like these are the legacy RTB channels. And again, not to draw comparisons broadly at all times, but if you look at the AdCP framework, one of the things that's I think really, really important about this is that, even on the homepage, you're seeing sort of how people play together, right? So this is a different kind of framework of, guess what's at the very top? Governance, right? Human oversight. That is the foundation. And the second thing is business principles. Not principles like what you believe in, but the entities that actually buy and sell stuff. This is who's at the heart of this. And then you have media orchestration. This orchestration layer is where the tech lab work is focused. It's between, some kind of orchestrator and, they don't, actually, be honest, they don't really have signals agents because they don't think about companies. They're very focused on the connections between versus the objects or entities that do. So again, this is just, you can read between the lines. They're talking about the lines. I'm very focused on the boxes. How does a buying principle, which could be an advertiser or it could be their agency, how do they actually buy from a publisher? Like, I care about these boxes more than the lines between. And only down here, you see RTB is on this picture, right? How do you actually do that? It does matter, but that's at the very bottom. So if you're trying to work up, you actually don't get to a lot of the big stuff up here. And then if you go down, kind of look at the flow, like, look, there's definitely complexity around a lot of these things, but we're talking about how money and media flow back and forth. So I only mention this part because if you look at how all of these pieces come together, look, we don't have every single channel here, right? There is stuff for, for instance, audio, which is not mentioned by what the tech lab work is doing. Things like commerce media, which I think is really interesting to look just as a comparison. Like if you were trying to say, I want to model commerce media in the AdCP spec. Okay, so a retail media network is a sales agent. Cool. How would I develop an account with a retailer? Well, I'd have to go call list accounts. Well, let's go back to that picture. Where's an account? Where's the idea of a business relationship? I don't think that's here. In fact, I don't think it's even on their radar to understand that the business relationship between a buyer and a seller matters. Product catalogs, obviously incredibly important in retail. Maybe, I actually don't know. I don't want to say conclusively that this isn't in the RTB or other pieces, but you start looking at things like sponsored products, not one of their channels. On-site display probably would fit. Measurement. Let's look and see if measurement's over here. I think that measurement maybe is an agent. Let's look. I don't see measurement. That's weird, right? Like, measurement's one of the most fundamental things that media is worrying about. Like, where's measurement, guys? Kind of matters. So I can go through this. In-store, not even close. You can't do RTB in-store. I mean, you technically could probably do it if you treat it like digital out of home. Store locations, catchment areas, super important. As you see catchment here, you could do this with a third-party data provider. It's actually native to the AdCP spec, right? So, just a lot of stuff here that I think is really, really interesting around how the real world of advertising works. And some of the stuff looks, suitably nerdy. But wait, what's this? CPC pricing? You can't do that in RTB. Can you do that in this framework? Does it say outcomes anywhere? I'm looking. Nope. So fundamentally, and I don't have any beef at all with Tech Lab. I think it's got amazing people around the table. I respect Tony. I respect David Cohen. What I am concerned about is that if you're determined to take a bunch of stuff out of your closet and try to turn it into an outfit, right? And you've got a bunch of people who've been going to the same parties and all dressed the same, and all of a sudden, it turns out we're not going to a party. The people who we're going to go hang out with aren't concerned with what they're wearing at all. Like, that's not even the right conversation. It turns out that the new world looks totally different than the old world. Well, we need to start from a different set of primitives. And I would argue that that's really the difference here of trying to understand how things actually work and how they're going to work in a world of AI, and build backward to the kind of standards that we need to actually put in place to help humans buy media and sell media better. And that's the heart, to me, of where we should all be discussing things. So look forward to how this evolves. I think there's a lot of work here to get even to the starting line for what the hard problems are in the agentic world. And, I guess there's some guardrails they're going to build down here. I don't know what that means, because that's not where the guardrails live, right? This is the guardrails. These are technical guardrails. We need guardrails at the core. So if there's one thing I would say to the Tech Lab, please, for the love of God, can you please put the most important stuff at the top?